Well, John called you about our kayak racks, and so maybe we can address that.
That's bringing it up.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I can't discuss that. Allison didn't give me a heads up on that. No.
Board of Trustees, this is Matt Lowndes. You are live on LTV. Apologies.
No problem. Welcome everybody to the regular trustees meeting of May 23rd. And I'd like to open the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Brian, can you do roll call, please?
Yes. John Aldred,
Here.
Francis Locke,
Here.
David Cataletto,
Here.
Ben Dollinger, Jim Garnell,
Here.
Jim Grimes,
Here.
Mike Martinson,
Here.
Susan Brookkeeper,
Here.
and Bill Hill.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's start off with the public comment. Tim Treadwell is here, Senior Harbor Master, Commanding Officer, for a conversation with the trustees. How you doing, Tim?
Excellent. I'd like to say thanks for having me to your meeting. I'm looking forward to developing a good working relationship with the trustees. Obviously, we share a lot of common goals, I think, between the trustees and the Marine Patrol. So I'd certainly like to, work on, getting it all together for our common good.
Sounds good.
Yeah. That it? Well, have a good night.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So did you have questions for me, or did you want me to just sort of?
I think most of our questions for you revolve around violations.
Mm-hmm.
We have no enforcement powers. We rely on Marine Patrol not only for the enforcement powers, but in the case of pump out boats, you guys handle the onshore stations, and we handle the pump out boats. It's important that there's a good dialogue between our two boards, and I think we've had that in the past, and I personally look forward to continuing on in the future.
Likewise, and I do have a meeting scheduled with your pump out boat operators at the end of the week, because I'd like to get their input, because they, being out there pumping out vessels, they know who's getting pumped out and who's not getting pumped out, and that's not always as clear to us as it may be to them. So any type of information we can gather from them regarding that is helpful to us.
Okay, we appreciate that. Anybody have questions for Tim? Well, Tim.
Oh, I was going to mention the next phase of what I asked before, or do I continue with pump out boats?
No, I had something else you wanted to do.
I was just wondering, yes, thank you so much for coming, good to meet you, and we will have a wonderful relationship, I'm sure of it, right? Yes. Our question, we have been going around looking at our kayaks that were permitted by the lottery, and we thought it was best to have a meeting with you when you're available and maybe discuss how we can coordinate where if someone does not have a permit, we give them a notice, which Allison had created notices showing them that they have 14 days or 10 days to, 14 days, and that's put on their kayak, and they have 14 days to come and either get permitted if they're not, but the lottery is over. But if there is an extra space, they could apply for one. And if not, then we need to take their kayak and bring it to a place where they can come and retrieve it for a fine. So
Correct. So that is currently basically the way it works with the abandoned vessels at the end of the season. So we impound those, we take them to our impound yard. And then when the individual calls the owner asking if we found their kayak, and they're directed to us, then when they come to retrieve their kayak, they're issued a summons for having it, past the deadline to remove it or not having a permit,
right.
Whichever the case may be.
Because you are very, very busy, we think we should perhaps coordinate with you where you have a day during the month from the summer, or however you would see this occurring, where you would come by and we'll report to you, but not have to call you repeatedly so that you're not constantly having to.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and that would, so the trustees, you're going to check on who's at the racks and put the warnings on?
Yes.
That's fantastic. That's hugely helpful to us. So and I think that's a good idea once a month, something like that, I think would be a good idea. I'm just curious, and I believe you may have this, when people get a permit for their watercraft, leave it there, do you ask them somewhere if it's possible to put some identification, contact information on their vessels? It's not just for you, but for the, right, great, because, you know, the Coast Guard is really big on promoting that, and so is New York State, because, you know, when a kayak gets washed off the beach and it's floating around, it could trigger a search and rescue case unnecessarily.
Right.
If that vessel has the information, contact information for the owner, it saves a lot of unnecessary search and rescue cases.
This year, we've asked that every kayak owner who is permitted fixes their kayak to the rack with a lock, and so they have a code for it. So if they are now this year,
So now they're all actually secured by a lock.
yes, but
Okay.
if they're unpermitted, I've seen them still tied up to the rack.
Sure.
Whereas before this, we used to have them loose and floating around, so at least we've moved beyond that. But I think if we could talk to you and figure out a time that,
Absolutely.
you know, or date. Go ahead.
I think one thing maybe it would be useful to talk about now is the number of times during the season that would not be too onerous for you, because this is the season, but would be enough to make people understand that we're really keeping on top of this. I think last year or the year before, I believe we did it twice, once maybe July and then once maybe before Labor Day.
Quite a Wednesday afternoon in some places.
Yeah.
And we had some discussion at the last meeting of doing it possibly more often, or, you know, different trustees had different opinions on that. But I kind of wanted to get your take on how much is too much, and you know.
Sure. Well, you know, obviously a lot depends. If we're going to be removing a lot of vessels from a location, you know, we try to bring a trailer down and take multiple vessels at the same time. It's hard for us generally, with the regular size kayak, for instance, for one marine patrol officer to put it in the back of his truck and bring it to the impounder. So we usually have to bring in our maintenance crew for that with a trailer. But that's easy to arrange. We can certainly accommodate that. I don't foresee that being a problem at all. Particularly, I think, if you set aside a particular, day of the week, something like that, that's certainly reasonable.
And another thing you mentioned got me thinking. You talked about impounding boats if they are there beyond the time they're supposed to be there. That's in the town code.
Mm-hmm.
We're putting stickers on boats saying, if you don't get a permit, or if you don't put a permit on here, or we don't see a permit within 2 weeks, we could impound this vessel. Is there a legal problem with that? Since it's not in the, you're taking a vessel in July after we put a 2-week notice on it. And, is there a problem with?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm going to make sure that it states in the town code that we lawfully, that it would need to be stated in the code that permit is required, which I believe it is. But I would need to double check that because otherwise there wouldn't be a violation that we could write for that. So that's a very good point.
What about just getting the boat off the rack? Could you do that and not issue a violation?
I believe so, because it's certainly a trustee regulation. Again, though, to write a summons, it would have to be in the town code as a violation, like leaving it after the season is.
Yeah, we should clear that up.
Yeah, I'll look into that tomorrow for sure.
Yeah, I checked yesterday, there's 2 at Mile Hill that don't have permits.
I was down in Mile Hill yesterday too, and there were 20 boats there, and they all had stickers on them.
I counted 2 yesterday.
How many boats altogether did you
I
count?
just counted the ones that didn't have permits. Yeah.
Because every boat that was there when I was
Maybe
there
they-
had a
maybe they-
sticker on it.
Sometimes they're hard to find.
Sometimes they're hard.
Yeah, they're hard to find.
It was-
They're in a weird place, and you kind of got to really,
All right,
I've missed that before.
If one of the boats that you saw, one of the kayaks all the way at the end
Yeah,
of
the
the
bottom
first,
corner.
yes,
That had a
because I
sticker.
tagged it.
All right.
Because it was underneath.
Oh, I thought there was a designated spot.
No,
Because
you
I-
gotta climb through
Yeah,
that.
okay.
So do you guys designate, just out of curiosity, each of you has kayak duty in a certain,
Yes,
Yeah.
interesting, good, that's great.
I want to go back to the pump out
Okay.
situation and with regard to boats that are not pumping out. You know, we'll put a sticker on a kayak that's not supposed to be on a rack. It's not really hurting the environment. It's it's kind of a nuisance to the people that are playing by the rules. But the real harm to the environment are these guys that might be just being irresponsible with pump out.
Absolutely.
And so, what's the process of identifying who's not being pumped out? And when you do find somebody that's on their boat on a very regular basis and not being pumped out, let's say I know of like 4, and you get that tip,
Mm-hmm.
can we put a sticker on that boat saying, we noticed you weren't getting pumped out, here's the phone number, it's free?
Well, I don't see any reason why you couldn't put a sticker on the boat, but as far as the law goes, because that vessel's in a no discharge zone, and if that vessel possibly has a MSD, a marine sanitation device, we're authorized by the state of New York to check to see that MSD is secured and that Y valve is tied so that it can't pump out. Right. But honestly, it'd be very difficult to stop every boat, say, coming in to do that. Plus, we'd probably be accused of some type of harassment. But obviously, if we believe that there's something, and this has happened in Montauk, more than I've seen it in 3 Mile Harbor. But in Montauk, it's a continual problem because you have a lot of houseboats that don't move, and people are living on those houseboats. And recently, I had a conversation with a gentleman from the DEC as well as the FDA regarding that. So we're going to be compiling statistics on how many MSDs we check over the season. We've always compiled statistics for how many boardings we do in any given season, and we're checking safety equipment and all of those things, but we never delineated in those stats exactly how many MSDs. But on our boarding report, there's a checkbox for checking the MSD. And then if that individual is either found pumping overboard, they would be issued a summons for prohibited discharge. There's also a NAV law summons. There's a town code ordinance for prohibited discharge. Or if their MSD was just unsecured, there's a violation in both the town code and the NAV law for unsecured MSD. So that's why getting intel from the pump out boat operators is really helpful to us.
Well, I think we can go over all that Friday.
Great. Yeah.
Come up with some specifics. That's
Right.
always been, even when we first started, we were thinking about having people explain what they did with last year's student before you issued them a new mooring permit or something like that.
Sure.
Log book entries or things like that. It's hard.
Right.
It's a hard thing to catch them in the act.
Absolutely, because unfortunately you don't see the discharge, you see the after effect of the discharge. And just like an oil spill, it's very difficult wind and current to specify which vessel that emanated from.
You can pretty much, the boats that never leave,
Right,
they don't go out just 3 or 4 miles,
clearly. Most boats don't actually, particularly our waters.
Montauk is.
I mean, most recreational boats, I should say.
That's why we try to make these easy as possible for people to get a free pump out.
Yeah,
I think we should put
and it
a small, or we should request to be able to put a small sign on the walkways of the docks at the marinas of places where there's some liveaboard stuff going on, especially in Montauk. That's where I can see it myself. But just to let them know, it's free pump out and the phone number for the, the channel.
So we had the free pump last time, made, a bunch of them made. I'm sure the Marine would be very cooperative. We could get a bunch more done. I think Boss Science made it. Yeah.
And then I know exactly what piling to put it on at one of the spots, right across from the guy's boat, I know right where to put the sign.
There is one thing that I have to clarify, perhaps with the town attorney. When it talks about the MSD, it uses the term operated, right? That we're allowed to check any boat that's being operated. It doesn't say underway. It actually says operated. So in a liberal interpretation of it, if someone's staying on the boat, they're operating it, in my opinion, as a residence, but it's being operated, right? I would prefer, though, that was clearer, right? Because, that might get somebody out of a summons, and they're not, but it doesn't say underway. If it said underway, we would have to actually check that vessel while it's moving, but it actually uses the term operated. So does that mean that it's not stationary at the dock? That's unclear.
Inhabited is operated.
In my opinion.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Operator on board.
Right, or if it's, right. I mean, if you're on the boat and you have the light switch on, it seems to me it's being operated, right? But that's my interpretation. So
If you're gonna make recommendations for changes in town code.
I have a number of those. That is one of them. That's on my list.
Rather than just interpreting the word operated.
Correct.
Change the word.
Correct. And I have another item on my list when we get to it that I also would like to look at in the code regarding the definition of a mooring. But if you want to continue.
Well, I'd just like to go back to the kayak thing.
Okay.
And maybe come to an agreement here between you and us. How many times in the season you think, we feel would be enough and you feel would not be too much for your guys? I think we're talking between twice and maybe 4 times.
A month or a season.
Well, a month would be, month.
That'd be a lot.
A
Okay.
month would be 4 times.
All right, you scared me a little bit there. No.
Per
Okay.
month.
Right. Per month, I think is
I'm not
totally
saying
reasonable.
Through
A
the
visit per
season.
month.
I think, or I was going to say, twice a month. But I'm interested to see how many
Well,
violations
I
you
don't
guys
think twice
get.
a month would work if it's a 2-week thing.
Oh, right, that's correct. You're right, that wouldn't work.
Personally, I think once a month, since now the permits have been granted
Yes,
by the lottery. So if we started after Labor Day in June, and then July, and then August, that would be our summer. And then we have 2 weeks after they've been notified. And then we could set up a date that works for you, which presumably would be toward the end of the month.
right. And honestly, ideally, that would be something really good for our maintenance crew if there was a little flexibility on that, so that they could do it on a rainy day when they're not out, doing other work on the dock, something like that. That's a great, foul weather operation to do.
All right,
Yeah.
so are we in agreement, June, July, and August?
Mhm.
Okay.
I am. Do we need to vote?
I don't think so. It's not our decision.
Oh, amongst ourselves.
It's not our decision.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Tim.
Sure.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
You want to bring up the anchor
Sure.
mooring?
So, there was a couple other things. Should I bring up the documentation issue? Did we want to talk about that, or we're already?
Oh yeah, John can do the conversation that we were having earlier about documentation. Do you want to mention that, John?
Documentation
Right, with
versus.
the documentation registration, like what do we do if we have mooring applicants who have pending either registration or federal documentation?
Yeah, so our mooring application requires an applicant to have a registered or documented boat before they can get a sticker. And last year, there was a case of somebody who had applied for documentation, hadn't gotten it back yet, demonstrated that he had applied paperwork, and we granted him one time, we gave him the mooring sticker. I think he wound up not putting his boat in the water anyway. Anyway, this year, he came back to us, he still hasn't gotten his documentation, he's asking for another mooring sticker. And another boat also is in the same situation, so I think we need to have some kind of a clear policy of,
Honestly, on stuff like that, simple thing is you can't put a car on the road without insurance and plates.
well, he technically can't operate his boat without either documentation or
So
registration.
that's it.
This is
Why
the
are
mooring.
why
That's
are we
correct.
mooring the boat?
Right. And just to
Well,
clear,
I think the reason would be if he anticipates the documentation coming within a month or 2 weeks.
Close, but it's been a year.
It's been a year. I think it's a long, cold winter. I don't know, for me, I gotta make sure that I got legal to be on the road.
So would the policy then be, if somebody comes in for the first time and can demonstrate he's applied for documentation, hasn't gotten it yet?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of like being half pregnant. You have
I know about those
either registered, which is acknowledgement from the state, or it's been applied for, but so what? I don't, the problem is as soon as you start opening the door to that, well, I've applied, but I haven't received, the next door that you're gonna have to open is I haven't applied, but I plan to. I think it's one thing that falls into the other. I don't know that you can put somebody in harbor. I'm looking at this from Harbor Patrol's standpoint. How in the hell do you enforce the law when the trustees are busy giving out permits to undocumented vessels? Okay, because to me, that documented vessel means A, they're registered, B, they have insurance. If that thing sinks on that mooring, I want to know the guy has insurance to get it the hell out of there.
I think that is in place, right, Allison?
So the main issue really is that we were being asked whether or not they could get their permit, like as an exception, when they provided proof that they are waiting on that federal documentation to come, which takes however long it takes. So that was the two questions with the two vessels. The other question then arose today regarding whether or not the vessels were required to have a New York State registration, or if just the documentation certificate from the federal government was sufficient.
I'd like to clarify the law on that, just so that we're on the same page. So a commercially documented, federally documented vessel is not required to have a New York State registration. But a recreational documented vessel is still required to have a New York State registration if it's going to be in the state for 90 days or the length of your season. If it has a motor, even if it only has an auxiliary motor, it actually says that vessels having a valid marine document issued by the United States or foreign government while being used for commercial purposes, that's one exemption. And then it states any vessel which is not equipped with a motor by which it may be mechanically propelled. But that's totally up to you. I'm not telling you how to handle that. I'm just saying that, we have a lot of problems with people obviously not problems, but a lot of people don't register their boats as they're supposed to legally in New York because they don't want to pay the taxes, obviously. And that's the reason why you get a recreational documentation.
Well, let me ask you this. Our application requires either New York registration or documentation. It doesn't distinguish between federal commercial documentation or federal recreational
Might be better to just
documentation.
align that language to the.
Just put the
It
word.
seems to me that would be an easy solution to your problem. The commercial guys, if it's a commercial vessel, they can be documented. Any recreational vessel, and you could even quote the law. This is actually in the New York Vehicle and Traffic Law section under registrations, not the NAV law. But that's completely up to you. I'm not trying to tell you how to handle that. I just wanted
We
to
just put the word
clarify.
required in there. Federally documented and any required. For the commercial. They get the federal thing and it's basically a tax thing. They don't want to pay.
Yeah, but we'd have to know if it was recreational or commercial.
Well, that's That's long as start. I mean, they're usually.
Do you have a separate fee for commercial versus recreational? Because the clerk's office does. So, okay, right, I thought you did.
Commercial boats registered for moorings.
Yeah. Right, but a lot of the little ones, they don't get a commercial. You know, most of the boats say in Acabonic, you know, they all are just registered in New York because they don't get a commercial documentation.
I don't think there's any.
It would be more something I would see on a larger vessel in the large boat mooring field in 3 Mile Harbor.
I don't think we have any of those. I don't think we have any large federally documented commercial boats on board.
No, that's what I mean. They would be recreational.
You don't have to be a commercial boat to be a documented vessel.
No, that's, I know that. I'm just saying,
Correct.
we
But what
don't
I'm,
have any of
right, but what I'm saying, so there's the 2 types of documentation, whether recreational or commercial. Recreational still requires you to register your boat in the state of New York if you're going to be in the state of New York for 90 days. But absolutely, if it's a commercial vessel, you do not have to register. So you can tell on a boat. So a recreational documented vessel does not have to display registration numbers, but it still has to display a validation sticker. So that's how we know whether the boat's registered or not, is based on the validation sticker, not the registration numbers. Does that make sense to everybody?
So
if it's a
recreationally, and then if you see it,
right.
and it doesn't have that validation sticker on, you know they haven't gotten a New York registration.
Correct. So obviously a red flag would be if it has a home port in New York and it doesn't have registration numbers, but it has a hailing port on the back that says New York, and there's no validation sticker visible on the boat. That would be a reason for us to stop the vessel and question, you know, whether or not they have a New York registration.
I have a question that Jim brought up about insurance. Do we require proof of insurance for a vessel that we give a mooring permit to?
The large boat grid, yes.
For large boats. But when you said if we do give a permit for the mooring and that boat sinks, are we accountable for paying, or they can sue for payment to retrieve the boat or damage to the boat? So should we not?
Unless the mooring itself was somewhere involved. Yeah, the reason we don't say, but we don't put the
Don't hold the tackle.
Yeah.
We also have a solid indemnification clause on the application.
Yeah.
We're only renting the space on the bottom for the mooring.
Right.
We don't own the top.
Right.
And that's correct.
And we are asking everybody to put identification and means of contact in all the kayaks, right?
Right. But in terms of validating that they are indeed insured.
I mean, just for the contact. We put that in the shit.
Yeah, they have to provide proof of insurance.
So it's always been a long standing thing. If you get some guy that's got their boat, that you can just tell by looking at it, no, like, there's no insurance on it. It sinks at the mooring or it sinks at the dock. If it sinks at the dock owner pulls the friggin' pulley off, throws it back onto the boat and says, no, it's on your bottom. We've paid for the removal of many boats, just since I've been on the work.
So it's the town. Yeah.
So it's
Big one last year.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And I watched that boat bounce.
Yeah. And we knew we knew it was going to happen too. It's just such a sad story. We won't get into that whole.
It's in Montauk.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. I know.
Well,
Lucky you.
Still a learning experience.
Lucky you. It involved me. Yeah.
the good news is the barge that we've been looking at Vanderveer's Marina in the past is not there anymore, so. I don't know where it went.
I don't know where it
It's not
went.
visible anymore.
Wow.
Well, they were talking about-
Hopefully it's not on your bottom.
They were actually talking about telling that barge out and making it part of the man-made reef.
Yeah,
I heard that.
it probably did.
No, it's probably part of the reason.
Well, let's.
That was Tisdale's old barge, right? Would you call it? Was it Vanderveer's barge?
No, this was a different.
David put a barge out at the reef.
Recently?
Yeah.
Must have been that one.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So are we in agreement here that we won't grant mooring permits unless we get?
be honest with you, John, I don't see the sense to it because what it does complicates the enforcement's position on this. Because, and we just saw how it can go bad. You had somebody who had the documentation that they applied, and a full year later, we still didn't have the documentation in place. It doesn't take that long to get state registration.
It doesn't. Actually, the DMV in Riverhead now, I went there a month ago. I was really impressed. It was one of the most efficient visits to the DMV that I've ever had.
Yeah, you make an appointment and then wait.
Exactly. There were greeters greeting me when I went in the door. I needed a screwdriver to get my plates off. They had like 2 or 3 they offered me.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I digressed.
Shane.
Yes.
I just have a question for Allison. Is there any reason we can't give them the permit when the documentation comes in? When the registration comes in?
No.
There's no reason for them to need a mooring if they don't have a operable boat.
Right.
Unless it's a sailboat, or there is though the one category of the sailboat that has no auxiliary motor, right? That vessel's not required to have New York State registration at all, nor a document.
That would be pretty unlikely in a large boat.
Right, correct.
New
Correct.
purchases, and during COVID, the documentation was not going through the Coast Guard and everything. So these are people that buy through a yacht broker. They're
Yeah.
allowed to sail the boats. They have some permission. It's just, what do we?
I agree with that. And the clerk's office had the same problem with people saying there's a backlog in their documentation. Right. Yeah, no, the COVID thing complicated everything. And honestly, it was very difficult from an enforcement standpoint, particularly during COVID, for us to enforce the moorings like we want to enforce the moorings. Not just your moorings, but also the town, also South Lake and Montauk is an issue for us. But, that was difficult because people weren't getting their permits. It was difficult to get your permits, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all that's behind us now, though, so we can do effective enforcement for everyone on moorings. Which brings me to another subject, if you're ready for it.
Go ahead.
Are you ready? Okay, so in the town code, right, it says that it defines a mooring, and I'll sort of tell you a story where this came from. There was a guy who had 2 boats anchored off his property in Napeague Harbor. And when we were checking moorings in Napeague Harbor, this is a few years back, I told him he needed a mooring permit, and these boats were there for the summer, right? But he said that his boat wasn't moored; it was anchored, right? And then when I said, well, for you to anchor your boat as per the town code for over 12 hours in a non-specific mooring area, you need to have permission from the harbor master. So that's in the event that if somebody anchors their boat, goes into the city, and it blows up ends up on the beach, we know who to contact. That was the point of that. But anyway, so this guy claimed in court that his boat was anchored, it wasn't moored, and he actually, picked up his anchor and dropped it 2 feet in a different spot, every day, which we know he didn't do, but I couldn't prove this because he was trying to get out of.
I would have thought the difference between anchoring and mooring, certainly the permanency of a mooring, but the fact that you're not on your vessel.
Correct. So that is absolutely correct. And so the whole point of me bringing this up is I'm working on, eventually it's on my list of town code changes so that the definition of mooring includes any type of, just off the top of my head, the town attorney would have to approve this, any type of ground tackle. So whether it's an anchor or it's a mushroom mooring or any type of semi-permanent approximate location, something like that, so that everything's covered, so that we don't have a problem with that. And I haven't really seen it to be much of a problem. On your bottom land, it's more of a problem for us in Montauk currently. But I think that's something that would be helpful, because I think the intent is to moor the vessel for a permanent period of time in a specific location. But the way the code addresses it, it doesn't really specify it like that. So I was just curious your thoughts on that, if you thought that would be a good thing to change, so that we might.
Anchoring is like, it's like part of navigation. It's something you're allowed to do.
Correct.
But I think, I'm not sure if there's any specifics as to a time limit.
Well, so it actually says, it actually says, so anchoring to place a device fastened with chain or line on the bottom land to hold the vessel in position. We know that. But then it says, and then this is unclear, that needs to be, it says mooring, as defined in town code, permanent ground tackle, also a place where vessels are kept in a fixed position. So in my liberal interpretation, you're keeping the vessel in a fixed, right? But again, my liberal interpretation doesn't always go along with what the court says, when they get the case. So that's why I would like to change that. And then the other part that applies is it says no person shall occupy a vessel overnight in any town waters outside of a designated mooring or anchorage area without permission from the town harbor master or bay constable. So the problem is, if they don't go to one of your designated mooring areas, they could pretty much drop their anchor anywhere except in a channel. And as long as they're not impeding, and they could just hang out for as long as they wanted to and just keep anchoring and moving around, right? But that's something that I'll have to figure out. And then it also states no person shall moor or anchor a vessel afloat so as to be anchored unoccupied for a period in excess of 12 hours without the permission of the town harbor master or bay constable. That was the other part that I referenced.
I'm a little unclear about the last one that you read there. We don't have a designated anchoring. We have a designated mooring area, but it's not necessarily for somebody to come in and drop an anchor.
Right. Well, so
that is a designated anchoring area also.
What is?
3 Mile Harbor.
The whole harbor?
Not, there's actually meets and bounds of it.
So in the NAV law, a designated anchorage is actually specified in the New York State NAV law in certain areas, so that you don't have to, have certain lights on while you're moored overnight because you're in a special area where other vessels can expect vessels to be moored. But it's pretty unclear out here. I'll have to do more research on that to see if, I don't know that 3 Mile Harbor, do you think though that 3 Mile Harbor is actually on the list for a designated,
we set it
on the light list?
Meets and bounds.
Oh, you did? Okay, well, all right, so there you go.
I'd like to look at the language again.
Right.
But we had a hassle where the DEC was going to close the harbor to shellfishing if there was more than 100 boats in the then 3 Mile Harbor mooring area. So what we did is we made the mooring area 3 times the size, so it wouldn't be closed to shellfishing until you got more,
Yes.
So what we did with DEC, we defined a mooring and anchoring area.
And I think that's, of course, of the utmost importance, because that whole meeting I had with the DEC and the FDA, that was about that, right? To keep all our shellfish areas certified. So obviously that's on the top of all of our agendas. So far there's no problems with that, and they test the water regularly.
You have to have a dilution area that I think we call it, for the purposes of the shellfishing, you assume 3 Mile Harbor to be 10 feet deep, basically. And the math that they require is down to like an acre for each mooring. So we were counting all the boats that were either moored or anchored. They wanted to count every weekend. Like they open Port Jefferson, they close it. Or like we close it for Boys Harbor.
Yep, exactly.
They would do the same thing every weekend. And so, I know I talked to myself, the trustees and communicators, we decided that the best way is to just make the mooring area a lot larger.
Interesting.
And there were written meets and bounds, I knew.
Well, they were definitely looking at, and the trustees, Allison provided a lot of information for that meeting, including how much you pump out, and the hours of operation, and how many boats there are on your moorings.
The boat count
that's what they were.
Down.
If somebody's visiting 3 Mile Harbor, there's nothing saying they can't drop anchor there. What parameters are there for that?
Well, so that's a good question, and that's my whole sort of point of this dialogue is that we need to sort of come up with better parameters for that. So because certainly we don't want to keep people from recreating in 3 Mile Harbor. we don't want to stop people from coming in on their boats and spending the weekend or whatever on their boats, but we want to prevent people from living on their boats without the proper permits. So unfortunately, the way the code is currently is there's too much gray area in it. We're getting the 12-hour rule, whether it's a mooring or whether it's anchored. And so that's basically what I'm trying to clean up. I don't think we have to come to an answer on that tonight by any means, but we should all perhaps think on that. And then the next time we get together, maybe we could, make some proposals, and then I could bring them to the town attorney and discuss.
There must be some federal stuff because, anchoring is part of the rights of that.
Oh, absolutely. And we're not trying to take that away.
But, maybe like 72 hours or
something, right.
There might be some existing regulations. I know you can.
Not in the code, though.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there might be some federal regulations or things. Yeah.
I'll have to do some research on that. If there are, I'm not familiar with them, but that doesn't mean that they're not there.
How old are these codes that you are currently looking at?
That's a good question. So they do, and the codes get changed. Unfortunately, it's a process that, like so many things, it takes time. There has to be hearings and has meetings and hearings and we recently got a code change. The town got a code change on some peddling stuff and on the beaches, which was very helpful, and that was good legislation. But part of my some of my frustration over the years, it's not that the town doesn't want to do anything. It's that people change, like in the town attorney's office. So I started dialogue with one of the town attorneys, and then that goes on for a while. But then there's a new town attorney, and you got to start from scratch, and so it just kind of sets it back. So you have to pick your battles basically and go with the really important stuff first, or what we believe is the very important stuff. To take it from there.
Refining.
Pardon?
It's a process of refining.
Yes, that's correct.
It is laborious.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
They change the code quite frequently.
They do, yeah.
I think we can come up with some numbers, see what's out there now, so we're not violating any federal regulations or anything like that.
That's great.
But something in the order of that, you can't anchor for more than 72 hours, whether you're on the boat or not, But then, something moves from acrobatics to 3 Mile Harbor.
Right. And then we would obviously want to have the same rules, although that doesn't apply to you for Lake Montauk. Right?
Yeah, that problem in Lake Montauk has been going on forever.
Yes. Correct.
So I have one more question.
Excellent.
It seems to me we have a problem with moorings being left in over the weekend. And we would like to begin to address that in a serious way. It's a significant, and we would have to delegate it to you.
Yes.
I want to ask, why would Marine Patrol engage in pulling moorings themselves?
Well, these are both excellent questions. So if we actually had a mooring pulling boat that had a rack on the stern where you could pull a mooring from the stern, then it would be easy. But honestly, with our current equipment, the moorings could be like the ones that we had an issue with over on the other side of 3 Mile Harbor, off the Property Owners Association in the
Hampton.
yes, thank you. We did pull one of those. That was easy. It was a small mooring for you. But then the other one, they got it on the boat, and they 300 horsepower, full throttle, couldn't break it free. So we're not that was sort of a test case in a sense that we tried to do that because you can't really use our one boat has a davit. But if you try to bring it up on the side of the boat, you understand it. So, right, I think you have to subcontract someone to do that. That's what I'm getting at.
Piece of equipment. I don't know why you'd want to beat the gunnels and the deck up on a boat, doing something that for all intents and purposes You guys are not setting out those moorings. For the most part, they're being set out by private contractors. Let the private contractors retrieve those moorings and charge it back to the boat owner. And the leverage to get that money is plain and simple. You're not gonna
Yeah, but in
issue.
many cases, Jim, we don't know who owns these
You
things.
know, some of those things that we
I
should
mean,
handle.
there might be,
the same way we handle-
moorings out there with no stickers on them.
Okay, well, if they're unidentifiable, okay, either by the fact that they're not labeled or by the fact that the locations, we don't have, let's say, a mooring in that location. Let's face it, there's only a couple guys that set these moorings out. You can ask any of those guys to say, hey, have you set something out at these numbers?
But a lot of these moorings that I'm talking about, they're not necessarily big moorings.
No.
They're, around the edges of the harbor, like the.
Where somebody went out with a cinder block and threw it in the, right.
And I guess my concern is if
Right.
you're talking about the trustees ponying up the money now,
Yeah.
and with the understanding that's gonna be reimbursed. May not be
Well, the
reimbursed for a lot of these
Excuse
small ones.
me, not the understanding, the hope that it's going to be reimbursed. I mean, we're in business, whether we like it or not, we're in the mooring business.
Well, but
There's
we
a
don't
certain-
have any, we don't have any way of recouping that money, except through.
So,
On this credit trust.
Except,
We don't
except
recoup a lot of money.
monitoring some of these moorings, there's boats on during the season.
Mike, what's your
The
idea?
permit application fee is very reasonable. The cost to remove a mooring that's left behind is pretty substantial.
It's more than the mooring fee.
Yeah, so if we were to put a deposit charge at the mooring application of, say, $500, which you get at the end of the season when you remove the mooring.
that's not a bad idea. The only problem is for the people that are putting moorings in that don't have a permit at all. So then, they're not putting a deposit down, but that mooring's still on your bottom land.
We're still paying.
And you're still paying to have it, you're still having, but I think for the people that do have moorings, that's right. But in theory, it would be easy for us to assist you if the mooring's left in the water past the season and it's a mooring that's permitted by you. It would be easy for us to notify you who left their moorings in the water. And then you could certainly, we can contact if you make and get them out. We can write them a ticket, whatever. But the problem is actually, I believe, more the moorings that are unknown.
Well,
We had a road mooring in Napeak Harbor. That we
Well,
actually
let me
I'm
just-
going to make a speculation that, okay, the ones that you identify that are people that hold mooring permits, those are pretty easy. If we have to pull, we've got the leverage on next year's mooring permit. And I'm going to speculate the ones that have no mooring permits, as soon as you go through the process of pulling those permits on those moorings out, those people are going to inadvertently identify themselves when they call the trustee office or they call Marine Patrol to complain that somebody pulled their mooring.
Yes, except, and that is absolutely what I was hoping. So, we pulled the mooring out of Napeak Harbor last fall. And, it didn't have a permit and we pulled it out actually from the beach. But that person never came to reclaim their mooring. There was also there was a data collector from Stony Brook that was missing around that same time that was in the area of that mooring. So that was one of the reasons we pulled it, hoping that individual might come forward and then we might be able to get some information about the data logger that Stony Brook lost in Napeak Harbor. But it turned out actually that a gentleman I know found that who lives on the road there, and he just put it in his garage, and he'd been meaning to contact the Marine Patrol to tell him that he had the data logger. So they did get their data logger back, but we never, the person with the mooring never. But that mooring wasn't worth anything. So that's the problem.
But hey, listen,
Right,
it's
right.
not
No,
going to be.
There's no easy solution.
It's not going to be 100% solution here.
Absolutely.
I think if you do nothing about it, what happens is over time there's the accumulation of these sort of pirated moorings that really stand in the way of people that actually have permits.
Yes, I agree. And so I think that unfortunately at some point, that's like a, 1 day job for a guy that has the equipment to pull moorings in an efficient, easy manner. And it costs money, but then at least there's a purge and then you start over maybe. I mean, I don't know really what other solutions, because we're happy to, because say you pull that mooring, we're certainly happy to write that individual a summons if that individual comes forward, but you don't get that money, right? So that doesn't help you recoup your loss. So that's I don't know. I mean, believe me, if there was a way that I could have our maintenance crew do that for you, I'd be more than happy to. But just for the one at Hampton Waters, for example, there's probably a bunch of them like that have been in the bottom for so long that you just can't break it free without the right equipment.
We should just, consider the cost of doing business, put together a list of what we have to do. And we've got prices from two contractors, I think $400 or more.
Yeah, so we had this conversation a couple meetings ago where we were talking about getting it, and the board decided to wait to see what the Marine Patrol could do with regard to pulling them out. But yes, both contractors said 400.
Ouch.
We could do that, but I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get in place here, or begin to, is get a process rolling so that, it seems to me we've got, step one is identify moorings after the season. That can we, work with Marine Patrol, maybe trustees can help on that.
Absolutely, we can help you with that.
And then
Identify during the season when there's float attached to it.
Well, we're already doing that, yes. Yes.
I don't see that happening this season, Francis, with the docks and everything. I mean,
I'm just wondering, is it something we can do?
So just so you know how we do the mooring enforcement on the Marine Patrol. So basically every harbor master gets assigned a body of water. And that harbor master then is responsible for enforcing the mooring regulations in that body of water. So every time that harbor master gets underway, they check and then they know who's supposed to be there, who's not supposed to be there. And, that boat didn't have a permit, then they take the Reggie number, they go back, they do the research, see who owns that vessel, make sure there's no permit that's already been issued, look at the list that we've received from your office, and then we take it from there. So that is, that is our plan of enforcement for that, to continue to do that. Obviously, it's harder to do in Napeague Harbor and Accabonac. The most effective way I actually found to check moorings in there was with a PWC, a jet ski, right? I hope you guys will forgive me for operating a jet ski in a prohibited area, but I was checking your moorings, right? That was a joke, but that same guy with the sailboat, right? He started telling me, right, that I couldn't, that I was breaking the law because I was checking his mooring on a jet ski. But honestly, I am legally exempt from that regulation of no PWC in the harbor. Yeah, but that just makes it a lot easier because it's really hard in a big boat, particularly the way, some of the water bodies are now, particularly Napeague and Accabonac, to get in there with even one of our smaller Marine Patrol boats to get close up on those moorings and check them.
But, in terms of identifying boats and linking boats to moorings, if a harbor master is assigned a harbor and he's checking moorings all the time, I mean, maybe taking pictures so you see the boat, you see the mooring, and then we could refer back to that in December and have a better idea. Would that be something you could add?
Sure. So do you mean so we take photographs of the boats that belong to each mooring and their approximate location, and then if that person leaves that mooring in, but the sticker's no longer on the mooring ball, then we would be able to ID the individual. Is that what you're getting at?
That's one.
Right. Right.
It was handy because what would happen is we would get the guys who, they'd get that little basically plastic bag that you staple to your duck line.
Yeah.
When your duck line got all fetched up in the marsh, or that the first thing we did was to go over here and yank and yank that plastic bag off your duck line, which meant when you called the individual you thought was responsible for it, you go, no, that's not my duck line. I took my duck line out.
Yeah.
Where when we went around, we actually, at the beginning of the season, Rick, Drew, and I would go around and we do a quick photograph, which gave you a GPS coordinate on your phone of the duck lines. So, nothing, with or without the freaking plastic bag, you could identify the duck lines, and you could, it was better. Once people recognized that you were actually paying attention.
Well, that's,
I think that's key.
To the duck lines.
that's the intent
Compliance
here.
became a lot easier. It was when we were negligent on our end, on the follow-ups. That's what created the problem in the first place. So
Fair enough.
nowadays, everybody's got a little cell phone. You go out, take a picture of the boat, the mooring. Listen, it's pretty easy to go through and identify somebody's ball. Come December, and in December, when they're pulling all of the other moorings, you probably can engage with the guys that do it for a living, and they'll probably give you some kind of group rate, other than knowing that you're going to call it a pain in the ass, and you ask them to go out for a mooring here and a mooring there. They go out and they just collect it. Everything
has to be done, do it, no shot.
and we pay them, and listen, some of them, we may be able to track down the owners of boats through Marine Patrol. Some of them may have even purchased a mooring permit that we can kind of enforce. It's not gonna be 100%, but I don't think we're gonna end up having to eat every single mooring we pull.
Yes, I think particularly, once you do the initial purge and you get I think from there, you're gonna, what are you gonna get, a couple guys a year, dumping a mooring in that's not permitted? Right. Right, exactly. Yeah.
May I ask you guys a question while you're all on this topic? That goes back to something that you said, Jim, about people showing up, that when we remove moorings, and then you're gonna have people showing up at the office asking where they are. We had 2 people last week show up from Hampton's waters that were some of those unpermitted moorings that we had been looking for.
Like I said.
What would the board like to do about them? Do we give them the application and have them just get the permit, or do you guys have to?
No, what you do is, if now that you come looking for your mooring, you get to pay for last year, and then you make your application for this year. And technically, you should be paying the removal of that mooring. To be fine.
So one of them, we don't know for sure if one of them was the mooring that the Marine Patrol pulled out. The other ones was,
The trustees are asking for payment to be reimbursed for our real costs. This is not a fine. It's a reimbursement for real costs, which is very much within our purview of being able to do so. And the very simple thing and stuff like that, I think you'll get compliance, is no ticky, no laundry. You don't come up with the money for last year's edition.
There's some complications here, I think.
Not really.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there have been permits granted for this year for moorings that have been left in. So they've already got the permit.
They already got the permit.
Some have, some haven't.
So this year.
We're talking just about Hampton waters. Hey, my view was these moorings should all come, for safety purposes, they should all come out, make sure they're in good shape, and then put back in, whether it has a permit already or it hasn't gotten it yet. If we start
That's another topic.
talking about, last year's permit fee, this year's permit fee.
Yeah, hang on, hey, John, you're not gonna be able to go back of what's happened in the past, unless come this December, we find ourselves full of mooring. And somebody did pay for that mooring, but they didn't pull it out.
Well, I guess
Or you've got the individual who had the illegal mooring that we pull out this year, that you say to them, hey, listen, we adopt a policy, okay? You're not singling an individual out. You're not treating anybody differently than anybody else. You're establishing a policy that you adhere to.
Yeah, which we haven't established yet, really. So what I'm saying, I think, is, I'd like to get at least Hampton Waters, I'd like to get it cleared up, like the moorings to come out, make sure they're good, go back in again. They're all permitted, and then, establish the policy from the end of this season on.
I think that's the only way to do it. We're already into June for all intents and purposes. I think the cow's out of the barn.
And there's probably other moorings that we've granted that have been in all winter that we don't even know they've been.
Yep, and you know what? This is, there's a new sheriff in town. We've got this whole new line of communication. I don't think we need to try and basically do this forensic mooring analysis at this time. I think we're all recognizing the issue. We move forward with it this year as we approach the end of the season. Allison's got a neat, concise list of the mooring holders. Okay, I noticed pretty much all of those mooring holders give you an email address for that, which is a part of your diligence. And it's very easy for you to do a blanket email on the 1st of November, telling all of those permit holders that it's policy to have have your moorings removed by December 1, or is it the end of December?
December 1.
Okay, by December 1. Any moorings left in at that time, we let them know, will be subject to removal and they will be responsible.
That's already in the application.
Okay, so listen, all we really have to do is our job.
I wonder, the sticker that goes on the mooring ball, I wonder if that is actually generally legible after the season, or do you believe it's mostly so deteriorated that we could no longer identify a mooring by the sticker? You might be able to answer that question.
The sticker holds up pretty good.
So, right, because in my opinion, there's at least, and it wouldn't be easy to scrape that off after the season, would it?
Has been holding up.
Right, so that aids in identification, right? Obviously, if that sticker is still holding up, and we can still get the information from it, that aids our.
Well, the stickers are holding up. If they're not, we should get one.
Right. Well, I have no info that they're not. I was just curious. I don't have a mooring myself, and I've never really, analyzed that. So I was curious.
At the end of one season, it will still be
I think so too.
legible.
Just while we're on moorings, commercial guys need moorings in the wintertime. We have that accommodated for.
Yep,
Commercial moorings.
can stay in.
Right.
So what do you guys want to do about the individual who has had his mooring in and has come forward from Hampton Waters to get a permit? Are we granting the permit this year and then making sure after the season that they take it out?
Yeah, I don't have any other choice.
Yeah, I think since we've granted permits already to people we know have left moorings in, I think,
Even though he was one of the unpermitted ones that we just found?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure we
It's kind
clarify.
of like not following the income tax return. It's so great, you just fill it.
Okay,
they're happy to get it.
perfect. Thank you.
Anything else, guys?
No, I think we beat this one.
Thank you, covered very well, thank
It's
you.
been my pleasure. Everyone have a good evening, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And talk to some of you soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
All right, next we have Bruce Forward, multiple Craig mining projects.
Good evening. Good, how you doing?
Good.
Maybe you guys want to tell me how you want to proceed on this. I've gotten information from several, I guess the way it was set up back in fall was submit the monitoring report, the paperwork, and then schedule inspections as you could, and then you just issue the renewals. So I don't know if there's anything that I'm not sure what needs to come before the board at this point in terms of renewals.
Yeah, I'm
versus.
confused.
Are you applying for 108 Wayne Style?
Well, those are I'm just, right. I'm just starting off just with the renewals part, trying to clarify
No,
that.
the renewals are, unless there's some non-compliance issue that hopefully would come up either in the photographs you submit with your report
For inspection.
or a site visit.
Right.
that we have decided isn't just an interior, or internal thing. We don't need to vote on that.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. So I guess then the question is, do you have all the information that either between the reports and the inspections at this point?
The ones that we looked at, and I don't know, Dave, I can't speak for you or him, I'm actually good.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, and then for the site visits I did, I'm good with those.
Oh, this is beautiful. Thank you.
So we kept track of the ones that we've been to. Yeah, I think there may be a few, Bruce, that I know, 17 Turbo.
Well, no, well, I won't even consider that a renewal since so much has changed. We'll do that as a new one.
All right.
But there is, in terms of the ones that we didn't specifically visit, we talked about Spielberg and Casimir Lambert. That's the one in Chauncey
I
Close.
actually
You
looked
looked
at
at
Casimir Lambert.
And that one's okay.
Spielberg. Casimir Lambert is fine.
And Spielberg, we good to go on that? Or do you need to set up something? I can't go in there. I need a property manager.
I
to get in there.
actually inspected that this winter, by walking along the shore.
I mean, they're doing a good job there. They
It's
put in
fine.
some
I gotta tell you,
planting.
the only thing I find a little disappointing on like Spielberg, and that was an early Phragmites cutting project.
Yeah,
And it came in with a buffer planting, which you did exactly what was proposed. But in light of how we do them today, it's a pretty anemic buffer. It's, I think, 8 to 10 foot at the widest, the buffer down there.
yeah, that's probably true.
You're looking past that somewhat anemic buffer at these incredibly green, lush lawn, which is all gently pitched into Georgia Cove. It does have you, to a certain degree, lament whether we should have ever allowed Phragmites
Well,
cutting down.
Let me ask you something. Are you allowed to, I'm not sure how you would set this thing up, but are you allowed to issue the renewal and include a suggestion or recommendation
I
language?
mean, that
Wouldn't have to be binding,
yeah,
but
Bruce, I'm making that suggestion. Quite frankly, it's kind of like, I don't think we could legitimately go back, because the fact of the matter is, we would be asking to post issuance of a permit, ask to have you do something that is actually outside of our jurisdictional boundaries.
yeah, no,
And the only time I've ever felt confident doing that is on the initial permit side, because that's the carrot, okay? It's not like we can force a homeowner to do a buffer planting.
no, you're absolutely right. I wasn't suggesting
We can
requiring.
only sort of inspire it by the carrot is the allowing the Phragmites cutting to on our lot.
What
Yeah.
are you suggesting?
Yeah, I'm thinking more in terms of, it would not in any way be a requirement. It wouldn't be a conditional, you have the renewal, but you have to do something. I'm talking about in the same way that the trustees have taken a proactive role in terms of things like the balloons, in terms of other things that you're trying to
We could add
promote.
we
And
could
add some
a letter.
language about buffers.
We could add a brief letter explaining the value of buffers in mitigating some of the nitrogen.
I think it could be useful, and I think it'd be better than to just come from the agent who got them the permit. I think it would be a useful thing to do.
No,
It would also be good to pinpoint the anemic.
Yeah, and listen,
to let them
this is
know.
one of those
They might not
things.
know that it's
This
anemic.
this
you know?
is one of
Right.
those things that was
True.
applied for and done at a time that, quite frankly, in the village, there was no buffers going on. There were none being required. There was none even really being, typically none even being asked for.
That's true.
That thing's got to be over almost at least 10 years or 8 years.
No, it's not that long, but the requirement for buffers is very new on the part of the village. And even, I wouldn't even call it, it's sort of a requirement, not much of one. There's not much teeth in the way of buffers.
Yeah.
Town or
Those
village.
houses that are being built along West Neck Road now, what kind of buffers have
West
they been
End.
required? West End Road.
West End. It's interesting.
Is it 2 or 3 houses?
One of them has a, I want to say 100-foot buffer roughly. And the one immediately next door, because it was a pre-existing, there was a house on that property and it was pre-existing, basically grass right to the water. There was no requirement for a buffer there.
Who required the 100 feet, the village?
Well, the village is new construction on that property, and yes,
And they can't require an additional buffer on a rebuild?
Listen, things are changing over time, but, you gotta realize sometimes, Sean, these permits get procured sometimes two or 3 years before the actual construction of the house. So we're looking at a work in progress. But, there still is. Okay, these are two projects that basically are shoveling the ground at the same time. And each one has very, very different requirements attached to it as a consequence. If you got to cross the way, across George Cove in Cove Hollow Farm, those properties are encumbered by a scenic easement. Okay, so there's like when it comes to the village, there's real leverage there for ultimate compliance on those properties. You don't have those on LaForest and West End Road. A lot of those are old properties. There's in fact there's several along that area that have basically a grass right to the water.
I know, I've seen.
Yeah, it's a very serious obstacle for the village
And
to deal with.
what's kind of funny though? This is one of those properties along there that does have grass right to the water, and that is a better property to the environment than most of them.
Interesting.
Because there's one along there that has no irrigation. The lawn is what would have been there 100 years ago. They don't do very much to, you can see that they don't really do anything in terms of like fertilizer or that. It's kind of hard to hold it against them, but it doesn't stop like a future owner that buys a property pre-existing non-conforming like that until they actually go through some site plan approval process. There is no way you're going to get any leverage to do anything there.
There actually will be an opportunity for all these places when they come up for new permits, because the trustees have a unique, of the three regulatory agencies, the trustees have a unique position or policy in terms of renewals. Each year, you basically go in. After a certain number of years, though, with the town, village, and state, you have to start in with a new permit. So at that point, those regulatory agencies could change the criteria for buffers if they wanted to.
And we actually there's nothing stopping us to petition those agencies in their review process on those individual
This is
permits.
only if somebody has a Phragmites removal.
Yes, right. You can't go another way. Yeah. Or you need something anyway.
Well, or, listen, it does happen. Somebody puts in an application to do something else, which brings them to.
You think a full rebuild would trigger it?
You would think, but, listen, it's all how the wording of the law and the village.
Would you want to go on to Georgia?
Yeah, so Arlene, I'll just speak with you afterwards just to confirm that you have everything you need in terms of all the renewals, and otherwise you send them electronically, right?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so in terms of the new areas, I think you have the 108 Wayne Scott Stone Road. I'll start off with that. Yeah, thanks.
Is it coming up?
What's that?
Is it coming up? Is it
No,
there?
no.
Is it now?
Yes, this thing. So this is the site of the old El Molino restaurant. And before that, it's the former something or other restaurant, et cetera, way on back. So it's been a restaurant there forever. A donor put up money for the Peconic Land Trust to purchase the property. We took down the buildings, septic and all that, and started in on the restoration of the upland. And at this point, what we're ready to do once we get the permit is to start in on the shoreline restoration. So if you could switch to the next. Thanks. This just shows a closer view of the area down by the shoreline with some erosion control fencing in there now. And you can see there's a couple existing trees. And you also can see at the Phragmites, there's very little Phragmites on the site. Some of this is up on the upland. Could you change the next one? Thanks. Jim and David were out and met with me, and we talked through the property and what I had submitted up until today. And here, what I'm doing is showing you some additional information that Jim, you had asked for. And it's in two different forms. It's first just sort of because I want to have something that it's easy for everybody here to understand. And I don't think I've been able to do that in the past. So what I have here is, first of all, just the sort of the top view, an aerial sketch to scale, and it shows the existing trees, which there are 3 of, and it shows an area of where there's some woody vegetation, and that's there's a native species, a couple of those present, as well as some invasive species. And then the rest of this area is the Phragmites, this green is the Phragmites treatment area. So if I could have the next slide, please. And this, I apologize, came through very faint. This is just a sketch, so I'll sort of talk you through what you're saying. This would be about where the erosion fence is. And this is the profile from the upland area down to the pond, with this line being the fluctuating pond water level. Because of course, as the water is letting in and out of the pond, there's gonna be more or less shoreline that's gonna be visible.
Yeah, hey Bruce, do you have more or less mean high water, mean low water?
Yeah, there is on the preceding one. So on this one, I don't know exactly where it would show up, but
Yeah.
there's one on the preceding. You have to sort of use the 2 slides together. It's the blue line.
It represents which?
Low. The blue line on the top represents the high water line.
Okay. And there is no mark for the low water line, because I mean, like right now, there's a considerable shore there, or beach, whatever you want to call it, which is only there because the water levels in Georgia.
Yeah, it's not in the
Right.
Phragmites treatment area. We're not dealing with some of the Phragmites that's on that property. It looks like it's on the property, it's not on that property. So on the property that we're authorized to work on, when the pond lets out, it's exposing shoreline where there's no Phragmites.
And when you say high water, you're talking about when the pond is closed and fills up with fresh, basically? Or you're just talking high water when the pond is open?
When the pond's closed, and I'm going to say in October, when you go to let that pond, would typically, the pond gets up to roughly the same elevation every year. Once it goes past that, we get such a call from the neighborhood.
But I'm just saying, it's not the typical high.
It is
low
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's not like high tide, low tide, except when the pond is tidal, and even that high tide is much lower than the annual high.
Yeah, this is dictated by DEC, which treats Georgia Pond, as a special case in terms of where they define mean high water mark.
Okay.
It doesn't reflect the lowest point that the pond can ever get or the highest water level the pond can ever get, because that frankly could change anyway. But it doesn't reflect that. It's not meant to reflect that. But in either case, we're talking about an area that's outside where the Phragmites is within this property limit. Yeah, back to the next one, second. So what I'm showing here, and this Jim was an effort to try to show the type of thing that you're talking about. If you think about the preceding slide, it talks about the species that are going to be eligible to be planted. There is some native vegetation there. Obviously, in those cases, we allow the native vegetation to restore. In cases where we need to supplement, these are the species that are shown both there and here. These are the species that would be supplemented. In terms of where we would be putting them in.
Bruce, I'm going to be honest, looking at it from here, we can't read it. It doesn't look like a plant that's just that long.
I'm going to read it
You
to
can
you.
read it.
Yep. So up in the upland area, there'd be Panicum virganis, switchgrass, and Andropogon virginicus, which is broom sedge. There's already a tiny bit of broom sedge there. We know it would take. The switchgrass would definitely live there. Excuse me, the switchgrass would actually possibly live down here a little bit, down the slope, but whether it does or doesn't, we'd be planting it upland. And then on the slope, it looks as if this is much more delineated than it is, because remember, this water level fluctuates. So I picked 5 species. Hibiscus vischidus, which is just the rose mallow. There's tussock sedge, I guess, Carex stricta, soft rush, Juncus accusis, one of the irises, versicolor, and I think this is called 3 square. Is that right, Jim?
Scirpus, yes, Scirpus americanus.
Right, or it also has another name, Scirpus solidus. But these are ones that will tolerate, in this case, it'll tolerate fairly deep coverage of water. In other cases, a little bit less, but they can all tolerate up to 12 inches of water over the plant, for extended periods, not indefinitely.
Bruce,
So
what
these are
size,
things I think you can try there.
when you put these species in, what size do you plant them in, like the quart size, gallon size?
Yeah, so that's spelled out on the preceding one, which I didn't expect you to be able to read, but just, in other words, you have it for your records. It has 1,200 plants of the 1 gallon size plants, 12 inches on center. And there were some shrubs, and I guess I did everything that way. So it's 1,200 plants of that mix, gallon size plants.
Yeah, hey, land work, Bruce.
Yeah.
I mean, that there's a pretty steep slope there. That shingle going down to the water. And unfortunately, it's an east exposure. When the trees leaf out in that area, there's not a tremendous amount of light there. Especially on the southern part of that transect. In fact, that's the area there's very little Phragmites as a consequence. Two things I asked for. One is an amendment of the plant material. I think that area is probably going to be more amenable. Keep your care restricted. It's very shade tolerant. The 3 square can be both. The hibiscus moschutus is a full sun plant. Iris versicolor can tolerate a little bit of shade, but there may be a need for like a fern component.
That'd be fine,
This planting, and perhaps a little depth to the buffer itself, because you're drawing the sediment control outside of the area that you're planting, and right now that sediment control is almost, it's pretty darn close to the edge of that where it breaks off there. Is maybe add a little depth there with a shrub component to go with your panicle.
Yeah, that'd be
I
fine.
think would be a better, would be a more effective way of mitigating this.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Let me also explain something, because that's already in effect, but I can add it on the language to the plan. Because when you get from this direction landward, that's all part of another restoration plan.
Part of another restoration.
So there will be native plants
Yeah,
all the way down.
I recognize that, but I also, when we visited the site, we saw that the seeding work that occurred over there last year was not, you don't have great coverage there. There's still a lot of migration of soils on that site.
The road is.
Which you need to keep your sediment controls in place there. The best way of basically getting good sediment control while the upland portion, the seeded upland, gets established, is to kind of have a nice robust planted buffer along the water. And I think it would enhance the visual quality of the property, and at the same time enhance the integrity of the overall plant.
Yeah, there's no problem with that. I mean, basically, we're talking about the whole area in terms of how we define buffer. This whole area is buffer other than the pathway.
Now
There's nothing nothing has to be built on there.
Now, this is in the village, or this is in the town, excuse me. This is in the town. Town typically is asking for a 50-foot buffer. They will sometimes accept 30-foot if this was in the village. The village is kind of locked themselves into those 30-foot wide buffers. So if we could pick something close to that, I personally would feel comfortable about this.
No, as I'm saying, the whole area really up to the road. The whole area.
No, I understand it, but you know what, there is the woody component of this planting in the all the way up to the road is a smattering of some bayberry in the property. And I understand that the goal here was basically to restore this place more or less as a grassland kind of thing. But typically that shoreline buffer would not normally be grassland there. In nature, this would have more a shrubby sort of character to the area. In fact, this whole site would have been more shrubby. We're going from pre-existing lawn and parking lot to a grassland area. So, which to me isn't bad. It's actually, long term, I think it's going to be a good thing. It's getting a slow start.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm not sure the best way to formalize it, but I think there's sort of two thoughts on my part. One is, any suggestions in terms of what you think should be added to that upland section are welcome. I would hate to commit to an additional 50 foot of a wooded area while we're still playing with the idea of what we want in there. And the second part of that thought is that we're keeping the erosion control fencing in place until everything's established, not just when the shoreline, section of it's done. So there's, the erosion control is going to be dealt with, but that's not to say we're not open to the idea of more of a buffer. I don't want to delay again to come up with another plan.
Yeah, I'm not really talking something that's going to take an enormous amount of time here. Quantify how many square footage of buffer are you going to have?
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Simple math.
Yeah.
Figure your woody plantings at 5 foot on center, which I think that gives you roughly what? Per 100 plants.
Well, I can figure that part out later. I'm not going to go on the top of my head, but yeah, I can come up with that. But what I'm saying is I would rather, given what we're doing with the overall piece of property, I'd rather have the flexibility to work with the planner the person who's been coming up who came up with the original vegetation plan, Piazza Horticultural, and work with them in terms of bringing your concern into it and come up with something that we can all live with.
All right.
Any more thoughts, questions?
Where does that leave us?
I think that leaves us where it's temporarily it's tabled, Bruce. Back with the final scheme on this, and I personally would be ready to vote on it.
Well, I mean, I'm a little reluctant to do that only in the sense that this has been going on a long time where I have tried to sort of, and again, I don't want to, just same discussion we had out on the site, but I don't want to try to have to anticipate what you're looking for in the buffer plan, even if it's correct, a month from now when we go through another meeting. How often do you meet now?
Every other 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. So, I mean, we could wait the 2 weeks for that, or you could just tell me what you want now in terms of what I suggested and work out, if you're willing to compromise it, then we work out a little bit of compromise so I don't have to have a shrub on 5 foot or 48-inch center or whatever, I'm going to be.
I just gave you something that's a very good guide, I think, to quantify in terms of what kind of numbers, if we agree on, let's say, a 30-foot wide buffer at this point.
Sure, that's fine.
The only part of that buffer that you're going to be putting these woodies in, realistically, is the military crest of that roll back. I don't know what that's going to amount with respect to your 30-foot buffer. Some areas it's going to change a little bit because on the north end of that property, that slope is more graduated.
Mm-hmm.
On the south end, it's more steep. So the buffer would probably be, would impinge, I'm going to say, into the upland a little more on the south end than it would on the north end, which is represented in your schematic there.
What I'm trying to do is I'd like to be able to come up with a number or the spacing that I know is going to be satisfactory so that we can make the approval now and I can get going on the project.
But like you said, I'm not going to do the square footage figure off the top of my head, neither am I.
No, but we can do the centering. In other words, if you say,
I'm taking this from the town of East Hampton. Their guidelines for
5 foot centers.
vegetation for woody shrubs is 5 foot on center.
Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward. And I think given the nature of this property, the fact that, it'd be nice to put a whole array of shrubbery that's emblematic of what you'd find here, but the reality is on a site like this, it is so traveled by deer. A lot of those plant materials, high bush blueberry, clethra, they're not going to survive.
No, it's going to have to be mostly bayberry.
That out the window, bayberry.
Yeah, it's going to mostly be bayberry. Yeah, so what I'm saying is, so if we go with that, I'd like to get started on the cutting as soon as possible is what I've been saying. But sort of still trying to leave this meeting, know that I can go ahead and start in on the cutting. I have the other two permits, and, you know, either you're serving, you know, you've given me what you need in terms of what you want to see back on a plan. So I guess I'm still waiting for, what is it that you need more?
I'm a little, typically on these plantings, when you're doing the Phragmites cutting, it's almost a given. You start your Phragmites cutting in December. Okay. We're trying to rush to do Phragmites cutting, when in truth, you know, we're increasing the amount of disturbance on the site because we're doing it at an atypical time of the year. Bruce, on my end, I don't see a problem with putting something together that everybody on this board feels comfortable voting on in 2 weeks. And given the fact that the Phragmites is already growing, it's already active, the stem count in 2 weeks is not going to change one iota. I don't see where we're really holding up that much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously going to have to walk out living with that decision, but I just want to make the point that you know what you're going to get, unless you're saying you don't believe I'm going to produce the plan that you're asking for. So, I mean, that's really what your point boils down to.
I don't know that there's any, the town of East Hampton doesn't walk out of a meeting giving somebody a permit on documentation that they haven't received. It's just, I don't know why we would be different than everybody else.
Well, you're different in terms of what you're requiring, so why you'd be different, because I produced a plan that the two other agencies approved months ago.
Maybe I'm not sure.
Have we seen that plan?
What's that?
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've submitted copies to Arlene.
Yeah.
So what are we asking for?
I just asked for that one component in a 30-foot wide buffer that's defined on the drawing, which is easy enough to do. You just drop pins on this thing, come up with the area, take the quantity, take off. I don't know whether you're set up where you can do quantity take off, so the drawing, or take a scale.
No, you haven't heard me say that it'll be difficult to do another plan. What you've heard me say is that given where the history on this property, that I don't understand why you won't say, yes, you're bring the plan in within the next 2 weeks, or bring the plan in next week, whatever it is. You're asking me to instead, you're basically saying, well, I have no trust that you're going to produce a plan. And then you want to be able to see it to approve what you already know is going to be on there. You know, it's a process that at this point
you feel you're being held up from Phragmites cutting?
Yeah, I am. And to the point that Jim said, you know, he made that argument, you made the argument over Coppola Farm Road properties, which I completely agreed with. And we're going to be dealing with that and submitting it. So we start in on a winter cutting. This clearly is not at all similar. And there are lots of Phragmites projects that get started any time of year, including July, you know. I mean, this one's going to get started this summer one way or the other.
I'm not a final vote here. I think it should come up to the rest of the board.
It is in front of the rest of the board. I guess I would like to hear a vote on it.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt 1 second and see if we can get that, get back to our setting here rather than the map? Unless we need the map so that the public.
I think the one before it.
Is there something you want to see?
Well, everyone's having conversations, so I thought maybe you wanted to have a meeting with the team. Otherwise,
So in other words, yeah.
Like map.
Yeah, so in other words, Jim's suggestion is that instead of stopping at this point, that we develop a buffer that goes back 30 feet.
30 feet, which isn't going to really show up as much on that, because
Right.
what scale is your drawing there?
Let's talk about here.
Yeah.
One inch equals 40 feet.
Okay.
So the suggestion is to move it back, which we, you know, kind of agreed to. We'll move a buffer that will include replanting that will go parallel to the red line, roughly 30 foot back, to include shrubs, which will be bayberry, will be limited to bayberry because of the deer issue, on 5 foot centers.
And you don't have to put them all on 5 foot center. Be creative. Do them in ways, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be,
Well,
it won't be.
But if he's asking for us to vote on allowing him to go ahead, and you're saying going back to 30 feet with these plantings at 5 foot centers, I don't know why we have to produce a drawing.
Sounds like a plan.
Necessarily to allow him
You
to
guys
go
feel
ahead.
comfortable with it? Somebody put a motion up. We'll vote on it.
I'll make a motion that we grant this permit subject to the additional conditions that Jim suggested.
Well, second. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed?
Thank you. I'll send in the plan within the next week. Thanks.
It's right. Thank you. Oh, what about the floor?
Did we cover all the properties?
No, what about Chervell?
Cherville's not, that's,
Terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To allow the administrative, that's in committee, so they don't have to vote.
Oh, well, it's on here. It's only-
Yeah, it was on, it was an application, but it's one before the village, so we have to wait till the village approves it in 6 or 7 months to modify it.
I'm sorry, you're saying for Turbo, for 17 Turbo?
Chervell is listed here, so I just wanted to make sure that.
Right, but that one has been approved by the state and the village, but and it would be, technically you did issue a permit, but it was never cut and the conditions have changed somewhat, so it was being presented to you as a new application.
No, they pulled it back, the committee, to a review.
Yeah, because you haven't seen the property yet, have you? I don't think. Other than Jim, you saw it earlier, I guess, but nobody else has seen it, have they?
At the moment, it's in committee, right? So you can talk to Ben.
You've seen it. I mean, you're cutting less than you have in the past.
So.
On that property, I haven't cut anything. Nobody's cut anything on Fragmented.
The 17 Turtle,
Yeah, 17
that
Turbo.
was cut years ago.
Well, no, that may be, but I mean, in terms of the last couple of years, it hasn't been cut. But the history on that was that the applicant went to the trustees to get a permit to do the Phragmites. They wanted to do dock work, repair a dock. The upshot of it was by the time the trustees had approved the cutting, but nothing went forward on that. By the time the village got involved with the permitting, they found that there were violations in terms of too much lawn had gone into what had formerly been wetland. And there were some buildings that had been put, or a generator that had put in too close to the wetland. So all those things have been fixed with a restoration plan that addresses removing some of the lawn and planting. And in terms of Phragmites, it's what was originally asked for. Nothing's being done with the dock.
didn't the dock get pulled?
No, it's still in bad
Or
repair.
it was gonna be a restoration
Actually,
of the dock?
It was a longer catwalk that went out farther, that was pulled out and used to be sitting on the side of the bushes.
Yeah, yeah. And the area where the Phragmite is going to be cut has pretty extensive native vegetation in terms of ferns, 1 or 2 shrubs, baccharis, but basically ferns so that'd be an area where you cut it just above the fern height and let.
Well, actually, it would honestly would be a property that you cut it in the winter time to grade and let the red vegetation emerge in the springtime. That's the smart way to do it.
I think that'd be a smart move too, but I can't get permission to do that from either the village or the state.
To cut it in the winter time,
Oh, you mean in terms of, well, I'm not, it would make sense
you can't
to,
get permission to cut it in the winter time.
no, because
I'm looking at this plain and simple fact that you got red-winged blackbirds and stuff that are already nesting in the Phragmites. You're gonna go over there and start cutting this stuff now.
I think it would make sense to wait
It's
too. I'm just saying.
It's problematic to work sort of out of season.
Yeah, no, and I think it's fine to wait on that one till fall or winter. That is not a problem, but I'm saying we won't get permission to cut it to grade. And certainly, even if we got permission for one time, it won't be allowed future cutting. I know that for sure. So we're gonna have to stick with basically cutting above native vegetation height, but there's no reason not to wait till fall or winter on that for cutting.
At the moment, it's in the Phragmite, maintenancing, so Jim, Ben, David, and Ben Dollinger can discuss it and approve it or not approve it, in committee.
Okay, thanks, Ron.
Chris,
Thank
you
you.
covered how Creek and what, Lancet?
And then how, if
Hot Creek, what?
You just come up? Okay.
For the renewals.
It's very confusing, the renewals that are in committee and the renewals
Yeah.
that voted on, but,
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Thanks.
All right, let's move on to old business. We have the 2022 horseshoe crab monitoring.
Well, we, in Northwest Harbor, at least, the second moon was very productive. My wife and daughter and I tagged 45 horseshoe crabs in one night. It was about 2.5 hours. We got back about 1:30 in the morning. That's right. And we counted 154, so I think that as far as tagging goes, that was our most productive time since I've been doing it. And I know John went 2 days later,
Well, I went,
the 16th,
well,
whatever it was. You
I
got
went
a little.
Wednesday night. What was your second night's count?
Which moon?
The night of the moon.
Oh, that was 154.
What was the first night's count?
That was much less, that was like 86. I mean, you know, that's pretty average. I mean, pretty much 50-50.
Yeah, I did the two nights after full moon, I got 186 altogether. And I also saw 4 tags, 3 of which I think Tim had put up.
Oh, those were Fred this year's tags?
Yeah,
Oh,
one
okay.
was an old one.
Oh, yeah, what was
I don't know.
did you pick up the number sequence on?
Yeah, I think the 3 new ones were, the first 3 numbers, 479, I think that's.
Yeah, that's this year's, yeah.
441 was the oldest tag.
441 was 2019.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, if you, basically, what I do is I message Matt, he looks them up on the DEC website, he gets back to me and tells me when and who tagged them,
Okay,
Right, let's do that.
and where.
yeah, I'll
We
send
just send them an email.
Yeah.
Will you copy me on that?
Sure. Yeah.
And how about, you must be really productive.
On that heat, we started on the new moon, 428. It was miserable weather. I went out, we counted 2 crabs.
We do that.
And I was so friggin' demoralized. Well, I was sick for the 4:30 and the 5:2 count, so I did not go out. There may have been more activity. 5:14 was 2 nights before the full moon, and we had 339 total crabs. And roughly 100. And I find it odd when you're saying you have 50-50 females to males, nothing even close to it. It's typically 3 to 5 times more males than females. Okay, on that night, we actually pulled the tag off of 144-1094, which I found out I had tagged in 2019. Okay, so then the night of the full moon, we went out and we had a total count of 377 with fewer females. And part of that is these females are being taken. They're being grabbed by the guys for collar bait and stuff so that you're losing females. But that same night, this was pretty cool. We had 3 tags that we recovered to include Mr. 4400 because we found him again. Okay, but we didn't record him. These are the last 3 numbers, 951, 952, and 963.
Wow.
Okay, they were tagged in 2021. They were tagged within 100 to 200 foot of where we found them this year. And actually, I want to thank, Ben was out with us that night, and it was great because we were able to put 25 tags out that night. Then 519, we really found out what Ben was made of. He really didn't want to make the midnight run. But we did it, and it started to fall off. We only had 201 total count, but we were able to put out another 50 tags. I got about,
How many tags did you get?
or another 25 tags. I've got 100 tags, so we try and we start this coming, is it Saturday?
Saturday.
We start this Saturday. I'm hoping that we get good counts because I want to burn up the balance of my tags just because I
Get it done.
want to get them done. But I'm hoping maybe Ben will want to do it again because that was actually great.
Starts this Saturday?
We had a routine down there. Ben was doing mug shots for the crabs as we were
What
tagging.
time is the call?
Nora was reporting
Like 10.
the size.
That's not bad.
So rather than write the color, condition, the shell,
Okay.
no, man, we have mug shots of every crab that we tag. So
Good job, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, it sounds like fun.
it is fun. It's actually kind of cool, especially when you find like one of those tags.
Yeah.
It's exciting, and it's like finding a abandoned pigeon.
Yeah. Couple big orgies.
Yeah.
We were nice to give it a heads up. We were dry hot water.
Well, yeah, Ben showed up and, just looked like he was coming to sell insurance. I had to hand it to him. He didn't miss a beat. He took his shoes off, threw his wetsuit booties on, and went boldly forth.
All right, committee reports, Act Bond, Park Street, Salt Marsh remediation update. Anything?
I'm gonna let you, take it.
Well, yeah, I guess, we last reported on, last meeting, we reported on that morning's, activities, and the next, I went to the meeting the next day, you were there too. Both of us went there the next day, and I just stayed for the morning meeting, basically, which was sort of a recount from the experts on what we had seen the day before, and just some observations they had that I thought were interesting. Compared to what they've seen farther up north in Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we don't have a lot of ditching here. The ditches are wide here, but not very deep, which is actually good for remediation purposes. The peat here is relatively thin compared to farther north. It's 18 to 20 inches deep here. There's some internal ponding, not too much. Let's see, not very much edge erosion on our marshes. And throughout the restoration work, we want to maintain that minor edge erosion. Let's see, the peat in the pans that they observed was generally still firm, which is also good for reestablishing vegetation in the pan areas. Pan areas are areas that have sort of become waterlogged and the marsh vegetation has died off. And when they get seriously eroded, they become kind of a soupy substrate. But these pans are still relatively firm, and they feel they can, take new vegetation much easier. In some of the areas up north near the Kaplan Meadows, there's room for migration of the marsh inland, which is good for sea level rise over the coming years. We're in a tide cycle now, which for the next 2 or 3 years will be a relatively low cycle, so it's a good time to attempt to do some of the restoration work. Starting in 2025, the tides will be higher than average. We're in a cycle now that the tides are a little bit lower than average. So how do they beat it? Pardon? It's
Planetary.
that's a NOAA thing. But
Coastal erosion, things like that.
It's like an 18-year cycle.
So these subject matter experts have gone back to their respective bases now, and they'll be collaborating on putting some conceptual designs together, which they'll share with the group down here during the summer. Then there'll be another field trip late summer, early fall, just to finalize. The conceptual plans will be sort of drafts. There'll be a field trip to discuss them and finalize the plans. And then we'll begin the permitting process, come fall. So that's the plan going forward.
So I'm just gonna,
In the meantime, what happens with the mosquito testing?
Well, we're gonna do some minor testing this year, probably just in the high, the full moon cycles.
Are they gonna refrain from spraying?
we don't really spray.
No.
Targeted pellets.
That's when you were testing, but if you're no longer testing, are they gonna start spraying?
No, I don't think he will. I think the idea is we'll be testing during the full moon cycles when the tides are expected to be highest. That's when the marsh will be most likely to produce mosquitoes.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be able to confirm the hot spots, and then during the other cycles, the hot spots will have been established. So I would think that, if there's hot spots that are established during our testing, and he would have to spray, if we're not testing during a cycle, we're not going to go every week. But I don't know if he'll continue to spray those spots based on whatever spot checks vector control makes. Otherwise, I'm not sure what that is. But I tend to think he's not going to spray unless we.
He said when he addressed the group that Tom Ivan, Suffolk County Director, he said that he would prefer not to. The budget has changed, as everything has, and he feels a lot of confidence that they know where the hot spots are, and they're not looking to spray all over. In fact, if anything, a withdrawal of treatment. But I would like to just say for the public that this was sponsored by Nicole Meyer, who is with the Nature Conservancy. And she calls the teams of people that came to speak to us and who will be working on the conceptual design, smart teams. And they came from Rhode Island, from Vermont, Massachusetts, and they have their specialists in salt marsh remediation and rehabilitation. So it was very interesting, and they addressed all sorts of issues and have done these before in various different areas. So I think it's very exciting to see the interest, and everyone seems be moving forward. They're encouraging the public in our community to get involved because they would like to have volunteers help at some point to actually we may be doing some digging of the runnels themselves and using what we pull out up closer to the shoreline so that there's some sort of slope. But so if there's anybody listening and watching this evening, volunteers, it's very interesting, and I feel very excited about repairing something that really all the issues over the years, the decades, of how the salt marsh has deteriorated in its usefulness, both environmentally and also for the fish and the marine life, to fix it. And I certainly learned quite a bit doing this. And as I said, my polygon is beautiful compared to last year. Over the years since we started this project, it's now all filled in. There are very few open pan areas.
Have you guys done any digging a little trenches to pitch that water off?
No, not yet. We haven't done anything, just mosquito larvae sampling.
So those films, what do you attribute that to?
The films.
You said these areas, these pan areas.
So the pan areas where they're still, well, for the most part, when I first started, we started 4 years ago, there were pan areas everywhere. And there were also, pan is kind of a flat pancake with very little vegetation, and it's got some dead, what is it called, John? Nicole described it to me, when you see that kind of algae looking.
Phosphorescent color, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. And it's orange too. That is actually dead vegetation, I think, that it had decomposed and so forth. So what I noticed this time was that where the areas were that had the mosquito larvae, it had grown in, unbelievably so. And underneath where the embankment is, and there are runnels, at certain areas, you know exactly where the mosquito larvae is. And a lot of it has been grown up since last year. Every year I've seen.
But nothing was ever done to mitigate that. It just happened to grow
Some
back.
of these pans come and go, can come and go. There
Depending
were
on the,
big pans developed off at Reno Von Gall's house 2 years ago. And in the walk we did last Monday, 2 weeks ago Monday, you noticed that those had filled in, but doesn't mean they can't, you know.
Okay. No, I was just wondering if something had been done
no,
to,
no, but the vegetation, Edwina still has the open pan area that's flooded.
It's got a little more vegetation in it than it
Yes.
did last year.
Yes.
My point.
But as you go up toward Gerard Drive, there were areas, that whole area where there's that pond that I think Nicole said she thought it was a watering hole made by the farmers to have the cattle drink from it. And it's still there and it never has any mosquitoes in it, which is unbelievable. But that whole area was grown in.
Conversely, in the Merrill Lake Sanctuary, there are a couple of obviously, not obviously, but seem to be man-made holes, which probably were also watering holes for cattle. And those do get mosquitoes in them.
Anyway, Nicola had sent, she asked for the report on our water quality sampling from Hampton, so I sent that to her. She's going to review it.
I think I mentioned this last meeting, but, you know, we've added sediment sampling to our, to Dr. Goldberg's list of things to do, water quality wise. And part of the value of that will be to assess the compatibility of the sediments around the harbor with any filling that might take place during the remediation on the marsh. So, and I should also say that I got communication from some people at the Aquatic Protection Committee who also asked for the Goldberg report and had seen that we had added sediment analysis, and we're interested in locating, you know, how we were going to locate the stations that the graphs were taken in that might be compatible with the work they're doing. So I kind of wrote back to them and said that was part of our intention, was to locate some of the stations in the vicinity that the submarine groundwater work that Cornell is doing in conjunction with the Aquatic Protection Committee. They might be useful, and I'm going to talk to Molly Graffam to get her take on where she thinks sediment samples in that vicinity might be located in such a way that their work and our work can be mutually compatible. So we have 20 locations we have to pick by the end of June. They'll do the grabs in July sometime during the summer. So I was going to look at a map and start off sort of an email discussion among some of the people that have been involved in this and suggest sites, and then we can go back and forth with you know, where we think sites might be useful to take sediment grabs and come up with a map to give to Dr. Goldberg by the time they're ready to get going.
Are they looking to do work in the area of the channel?
Well, I think, you know, when we met with Dr. Goldberg, we talked about this a little bit. You had talked about, you know, the dredging work and how the sediment analysis down sort of between the inlet and the launching ramp had been a stumbling block in the past. So I think that's one place we want to target for.
Yeah, I mean, are they looking to do any marsh elevation and that anywhere near there?
Near the launching ramp?
Yeah.
Well,
Side?
it's on the other side.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So,
Probably, the sites they'll probably focus in on will be either in the Merrill Lake Sanctuary, which is sort of directly opposite the inlet, and probably in the Kaplan Meadows Park, which is farther north, kind of opposite the culvert, actually. So I have a feeling that's where they'll focus.
yeah. But the area where we want to remove that sediment, you know, over there by Hellgate, some of those places, might give that place down a little bit.
I think we definitely want to pick some stations for him to test near the potential areas of marsh restoration, so that if sediment is required and, you know, we know what we're looking at in the vicinity, that, sediment could be taken and easily transported to the marsh, more easily transported to the marsh.
It's so we can keep it coordinated, that we're all sort of working in the same direction, right?
That's what we're trying to do.
I guess you don't need to talk about the Fred Mighty Maintenance Renewal Program. Lines.
We did
Get the money, yeah, they did all of that. We have a request from Greg Barry, Warren, Street.
Well, this is, he came to the office and he has a mooring in 3 Mile Harbor. It's commercial fishing. His boat his engine's having trouble. He's got traps over near Hog Creek. He's having a hard time getting back and forth from 3 Mile Harbor to his traps. He asked for a temporary mooring permit somewhere in Hog Creek, so he didn't have so far to go. He's asking for, I think, a month tops. I tried to get in touch with him today. I had some trouble with the phone numbers. I wasn't able to talk to him. I did talk to Barley about, potential sites around there that might be public property that a mooring could be granted off of. And there are some public properties. The problem is, the properties are fairly deep there. I'd say maybe in the neighborhood of 100 yards or so, 300-400 feet from the road to the water, and most of them are fairly steep down to the water. So there's no real ability to get close to the water with a vehicle. So I'm not sure how useful. I don't know. That's why I need to talk to Greg and see what his understanding is of where he might be able to get a mooring and how that would work for him bringing a cat.
Well, if there's an appropriate site, is anybody be opposed?
I don't, I'm gonna be honest, I don't see what's any spot on it that makes sense.
I don't see
I'd be happy to meet with him. If he has a site in mind, I'd be happy to go down there and,
Well, it would have to be off of public proproperty.
Yeah, there's some CPF properties.
There's about 6 or 8.
That have been purchased, but they're all high.
Yeah, they're all very, far from the road and steep. And then, no ability to drive now. So, I was gonna call him, and if he understands all that and still would like to pick up property, maybe we can get together with him.
Where's his traps?
Somewhere off.
He said they were right outside of Hog Creek. I did ask him if he could give us a location of where he was hoping to moor. I haven't received that yet.
Maybe he'd pull, it's all private beach out there.
Probably it's in the bay.
I think it's locked down in there.
Well, that trap doesn't touch the beach.
No, but I mean, a lot of the guys, I know like in Fort Pond, they back their truck down and they basically load out right off the beach. But if you have that ability,
Where do you have that ability?
It's gated, that's gated.
No, I know.
I mean, maybe he could access it through Clearwater if they would give him permission.
You'd have to work that out with Clearwater.
Yeah, I mean, that would have to be between he and Clearwater or he and Lionhead.
With a car. That's it.
I mean, he might be thinking, well, maybe I can just moor inside the inlet somewhere, but that's either Lionhead or Clearwater control anyway. But we give him a permit, but he couldn't get to his boat. He couldn't get from upland property unless he got permission from
He
them.
might work, he's got to work on that with them, too.
If he wants to
Yeah.
access through there, I mean,
Spring Park is too far.
where would they?
Yeah, Spring Park.
What, for what? For mooring?
There's one on Isle, right?
I think he's asking in trustee ward.
Oh, okay.
This is the one, is actually. I'm gonna assume he needs to soon,
Right.
right? So let's just agree as a board
Yeah, agree.
that if John and I agree to meet with Greg and we agree with the spot, that we can go ahead and allow him to.
Sounds good.
That sounds fine to me.
I'll second that one.
Yeah.
Are you making a motion? Yes.
Sound the way.
Okay, so make
Probably
a
my first
motion.
motion, so I'd like to make a motion.
I second. Great. Good job.
We got a motion.
Yeah, we already had a
All in
motion.
favor?
Is that one of the oyster cards?
Maybe.
There is one over there, yeah.
Weren't you over there?
Excuse me?
And draw an oyster
I
card?
did, yes.
Is it
The
there?
CPF,
Is it on that property?
Can you drive down there?
maybe, I can't, you know what, I really can't tell from this because I had to walk down the property and the house was that a house right here?
No, there's no house on that.
Okay, no, I know that, the CPF funding property, but there was a house that I had to walk right by. This looks familiar, yes, because there was a sailboat, a little funky.
Was there a boat basin like that?
There was a little, alcove like that, that had a sailfish or something moored in there, or
This may be the site of the current oyster garden. That might be a problem. Or one.
where is the,
This is all pending.
Right.
This is all
the
pending.
marina from
We're
there?
in a spot.
It's actually never
Is
issued.
that where it is from that spot?
But we'll mark it.
Yeah, that looks about right. That looks about right.
We only have those.
Move on to administrative payment of the bills. We have Staples, $129.89 for office supplies and dock supplies. East Hampton Star, $149.32 for legal ads. So a motion to pay the bills.
And I'll second it.
All in favor? Anyone opposed? All right, we have minutes from May 9th. Anybody have a chance to read it?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. I make the motion.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor? Anyone opposed? And we have a renewal of a certificate of deposit ending in 6/6/83.
I make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody have anything else?
Moi, I do. Two things. I just would like to ask, the First Hampton Pride Parade. I sent you an email. We have Betty Majors on June 4th. This would begin at 12 noon, and I do have a list. I spoke to, the person who has started this parade, and it is being, overseen by the village of East Hampton, and he's got about, I think, 40 participants, so I would like to know if anyone would like to join in and support the community. It's the first parade, and I think it's very important that, we acknowledge, the LGBT community. So I am volunteering to participate in it and drive the truck. Got some low flags to go on it. And it would be delightful to have a few of you, if not all of you, join in. So I sent you an email and I asked if you would write back to me and let me know. So anybody here want to jump in with me?
This is on Saturday, June.
June 4th, and it begins at noon. It starts at Pondview.
That's a
So
little bit of a struggle.
I know, you're out in Montauk.
Well, it's not on the month.
You've got work.
I have to, you know, I work weekend.
Betty's is like 6 o'clock. Betty's.
6:30.
6:30.
I have a wedding that day, but I will make the Betty. So I just
Okay,
can't do
that's
that.
at 6:30. I sent you all Betty's, information.
I'll make it.
You'll come with me, Bill? That's great. Okay, anybody else here?
Yeah, I'll put a.
Dave, Bill, okay, I appreciate it.
Chocolate.
What?
Shotgun.
Sure.
Hey,
Very careful. Good score. Great.
I'm driving. I'm driving.
Is there anything else?
I just want to bring up again, what I brought up a couple meetings ago with, you know, the public access to our beaches and having, the ability to cross from one portion of the beach to another with bulkhead in between. And, you know, just moving forward, when we do issue renewals on permits, whatnot, we should try to come up with a way to ensure that the public has access to nice long strolls on the beach. When we allow a hard structure to be built to protect somebody's property, you know, I guess originally we didn't realize that we were going to be giving up our beaches, but as it turns out, we are. And so I feel that we, as representatives of the people, have a debt to the people to keep that access available. So I'm going to continue to work on it. I haven't done much yet, but I'm hoping to be able to make some headway with Chris and the rest of you guys.
Arlene or Ellison sent out by
Did you see the
email.
documentation
document.
about the
Passing way.
Yes.
passing ways?
I did, but it doesn't, it doesn't, well, it doesn't cover everywhere.
Well, it's only, if the trustees would permit a bulkhead or the rebuilding of a bulkhead, we would this easement on that bulkhead. We can't retroactively go around every bulkhead in town and slap a,
No, we don't have
Passing
the
ways.
eminent domain ability like that.
but we are required to,
It's, I think the what we were, when we're gonna look into the one particular place you had in mind,
Yes, I was.
because that looks like it might fit in. I know Chris is not here.
I just wanted to bring it up, just to put it on the.
No, because that passing is, it also requires that they be maintained in a safe condition. So I think specifically, we just have to look into the specific parcel, the specific area that you're primarily interested in. But it also covers anything that trustees will be giving out in the future.
Yes. But going forward, at least we know that we have
What was
that.
the issue with the one that you were concerned about a safety rail or something?
Yeah, well, there wasn't an issue with crossing. I don't know whether or not it's legal for us to walk the way we do. I'd like to know if it is. And, but the erosion at the bulkhead has gone really high. So when you're walking along the bulkhead edge, and in some cases it's a little bit unstable, it's a 12-foot drop. So,
What body of water is this?
this is like along Barnes Landing, from Barnes Landing towards the north.
Didn't the passing ways indicate a certain amount of footage for that top piece that, because
It's
what you showed was very narrow and not really something that you would feel safe
I
walking.
couldn't walk that safely.
So isn't it, there wasn't a
So my initial was to think, you know, a walkway with a railing would be something that, you know, would be useful and good, but as Chris pointed out, it's not, a railing is not necessarily secure and safe.
Well, railing is required by code in some cases, which you gotta recognize you're asking A, to cross private property. Okay, so that's what this is. And then you're asking second to that for accommodations for people's views and stuff. I think it's something that you can have over the legal aspects of it.
Yeah, it would be private property, privately maintained railing for the purposes of public passage. There's a lot of complications.
Well, I think what you do is you take the private property owner and you're asking them to absorb the liability of the public trespassing, I'm gonna call it.
Or remove their wall and give us back our beach.
Well, that's something more easily said than done.
I know.
As, you know, I'm sympathetic to the award for a property owner.
I would think.
I understand the town's policy on new bulkheads, but to take and turn around in a retroactive aspect and try and basically take a big bite out of an apple there. Oh, there's no legal precedent for it.
No, I think you're right about that. I would think though, at the time this passing way easement was conceived and instituted, there might be some documentation as
And I think
to
on some new hardening approaches or new approaches, I think you see the door is open for something like that. On somebody that comes back to replace a pre-existing permitted bulkhead or revetment. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I would think that would be a pretty heavy lift. Because you'd have to cite.
I would
You'd
think,
have to cite something to get traction.
I'm not talking legally here, but I would think you could make an argument that if somebody built a bulkhead and there was still a beach, and there was no passing way easement in place, the understanding of which you could walk along the beach, and now 20 years on, the bulkhead needs to be rebuilt, and there's no beach. I think you can make an argument that there's no way.
I'm still not a lawyer. I don't know how.
Make an argument about anything.
I don't know how.
Well, I know.
That would actually hold up.
As a user, as the person walking,
Court challenge.
sure is frustrating.
Well,
But I don't want to, never mind.
To be continued.
I would just like to mention that we had a great class. I think Allison, me, David, and I with Michael Hampton, our website designer. And so we are doing a class once a month. And David posted his first article this week. So take a look. Take a look. I always have to, ring the bells and let people know. But the website's looking great. And I put your picture on with the trustee Facebook app.
My Christmas
Yeah,
gift. Thank
it's
you.
there. It's there.
And thank you, Jim. That honey is delicious.
Yeah, he's got the best honey.
Montauk honey, East Lake, or
That's all.
tasted like East Lake to me.
Believe whatever you want. I think I'm gonna make it next week.
You need a refill? It's sad.
Yes.
It is the best honey I've ever had. I would say.
I will agree with that too.
Right? I mean, you have to leave your garage door open and it's all
We
piled up.
really need to talk about this. I'd like to make a motion.
I'll second. Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.